A newspaper article published in 2017 called it a great film with no audience. Amrish Puri, in his biography, talked about this film. Only this genre of films gives me utmost gratification, and that's what keeps the adrenaline going. In 1992, Dharamveer Bharati's postmodern novella Suraj Ka Satvan Ghoda was made into a film by Shyam Benegal. Like commercial cinema, Suraj Ka Satva Ghoda uses emotional drama, familiar elements from mainstream cinema such as unrequited love, parental tyranny, and socio-economic disparity. But it is also criticizing these conventions through a critical narrator. But this narration is in turn critiqued by an even more critical narrator. This creates a complex and layered narrative that challenges the audience to think critically about what they are saying. The plot, on the surface, it is about the stories of Jamuna, Lily, and Satti through the character of Manik Mullah. He both influences the events within the stories and narrates them to his friends, positioning himself as both a character and a narrative in the narrative. Suraj Ka Satva Ghoda uses a narrative technique similar to an Escher diagram, making it difficult to determine whether it is telling one story or three interconnected stories. It has multiple entries into the same narrative at different points in time, making it challenging to follow a clear sequence. As a result, the three stories might actually be the same story told three times. In my opinion, the movie is more than that. It is a meta narrative about storytelling and narrative. And you cannot force fit it into a genre. Non-linear metafiction, unreliable narrator, reliable meta narrator, circular narrative, or all of the above. Manik is a story crafter. Manik and his audience discuss narrative technique and great storytellers of the world. And the discussion comes to rest on Chekhov. Chekhov is reported to have said to a lady once, "Telling a story is not difficult. You can place anything before me, for example, this glass, this ashtray, and ask me to tell a story about it. Presently, my imagination will be roused. The life of many people connected with the object would rise in my memory, and a story would construct itself." A love for storytelling for its own sake. The narrator's gift for storytelling seems to overshadow the stories themselves. Manik Mullah begins to tell the story of Satti, the third woman who played an important role in his life. Before he starts, one of his friends picks up a knife with a carved handle and asks if it can be the focus of the story. Manik responds that it would not require any effort, as the knife is already a part of Satti's story. This coincidence suggests that any object or idea can become a story if only the storyteller is creative enough. But can you believe the storyteller? Manik Mullah is an unreliable narrator. According to Manik Mullah, there are three essential elements of a modern short story: a clear beginning, middle, and end. He believes that these components create a sense of completeness in a narrative. Here's how he defines each part. The beginning is the first part of a story, with nothing preceding it. The middle comes next and has both the beginning and end following it. Finally, the end brings closure to the story, coming after the middle and leading directly to the waste paper basket. But each element must be present for a complete and satisfying narrative experience. But Manik Mullah stories don't always have clear-cut endings. The story of the first afternoon, focused on Jamuna, comes to an end because the audience interrupts Manik Mullah's narration with a question about what happened next. They ask. Mullah responds in a slightly defensive way. "And what an intelligent lot you are. Is there a variety of ends to a love story? There is only one end. The heroine got married. Manik Mullah was left gaping. You can garnish it any way you like." Although Manik Mullah declares her story has concluded, He continues to share details of Jamuna's life in subsequent afternoons, such as marriage, widowhood, and friendship with Tanna's wife. Manik Mulla's stories meander and lack clear endings. So, Manik Mulla's willingness to disregard his own rules for short storytelling shows how reliable a narrator he is. But can you be emotionally invested in his stories? I could not fully immerse in the story world. The irony and parody wouldn't let me. Manik Mullah is a strong advocate for the idea that stories should have clear morals or messages. However, the moral he draws from the first story is so absurdly unrelated to the actual content of the story that it creates a parodic effect. The story is about Jamuna, who initiates secret meetings with Manik due to his societal restrictions on marriage. Manik visits Jamuna's house because her family owns a cow, which his sister in law needs for a vow. Manik brings the romantic angle in with the statement, uneven distribution of wealth is the root cause of love. He concludes that every household should own a cow to improve the nation's cattle wealth and benefit future generations. This moral serves to mock the tendency of viewers to search for deeper meanings in stories and highlights the absurdity of trying to extract universal lessons from specific narratives. So, this was about plot. Now, let's see how Benegal uses visual storytelling to bring the nuances of the postmodern story. In the first scene of the movie, we see a series of paintings that draw the narrator's attention. As the narrator gazes at these evidently non-realistic, almost surrealistic paintings, he pauses before the third, a portion of which seems to represent a neighborhood, and launches into the story of Manik Mullah and his storytelling. The camera zooms into the painting as if trying to locate the neighborhood of Manik Mullah and his friends inside it. The voice of the narrator can be heard saying that it feels as though the sounds of the neighborhood are echoing in his ears. Thresholds between different worlds are intentionally showcased in self-reflexive modes, breaking realistic conventions of portrayal. An example of this is the story of Jamuna in Manik's narration, which creates a visual illusion that challenges the audience perception of reality and storytelling. When Manik is recounting Jamuna's story, he reaches the juncture of our wedding. Manik is distracted by the sound of a wedding procession in real time outside his house and rises to look out through the window. He then calls his audience to join him. And what greets there, as well as the viewer's eye, is the wedding procession of Jamuna's husband. The scene has by now cut seamlessly into the Barati or the bridegroom's party making its way to her home, while a furious Jamuna, disappointed with her prospective husband's old age and appearance, stands on the terrace with an expression of frustration on her face. The transition from one context to another through a link that is neither chronologically nor logically sequenced but laterally. This narrative move is collapsing of context so that an isolated and general event, a wedding ritual, becomes a connector of two vastly different times and stories. To clarify, the Barat that Manik Mullah looks at out of the window does not serve as a reminder of Jamuna's wedding, which would be a more natural connector within the demands of realism. Indeed, this wedding becomes that, Jamuna's wedding, so seamlessly moving through what are in fact two unconnected episodes. In another scene, Manik Mullah had just begun to narrate his sequence of stories to his friends. It is an informal setting and watermelons are being consumed. After they are done, Manik leans out of the window and throws the watermelon skins out, where they drop on a cow standing outside. The story that Manik begins to narrate is the story of Jamuna, which in his telling revolves around the cow that he had to feed to please his sister-in-law. Coincidence is not quite the word to explain this linking of two contexts through a cow. Benegal has used this technique before in Trikal, past and present, seamlessly, as if both coexist. Also because characters tend to get repetitive portrayal, as in the case of Sakti, turning from a minor character in someone else's story to a major character in her own. Events permit themselves to be narrated more than once. But the manner of revealing information pertaining to the same events happens in increasing doses. For example, Jamuna's visit to her parental home for the first time after getting married is shown twice with incremental repetition. The first time, when she enters her home, her mother talks to her about Tanna, saying that a match has been arranged for him. Jamuna replies that she is not interested in Tanna. This very scene is replayed later in the film, where for all her supposed indifference to Tanna, Jamuna goes up to Tanna and speaks to him, asking him if his fiancée is more beautiful than she is. This extreme non-linearity of the structure makes it difficult to assert the timeline of many events. Apart from adding one more layer to the non-linear trajectory, this change also establishes the character of Jamuna as duplicitous or wavering, depending on how judgmental the viewer is. This extra information, when it follows a remark to her mother that she is not interested in Tanna, becomes a way of adding complexity to her character, more subtly than straightforward description, showing rather than telling. Similarly, Benegal also repeats scenes by replaying them without addition, but now with altered perspectives. These identical repetitions succeed in the objective to scatter the linearity of the timeline by complicating visually the questions of what came before, what came after. One of the striking instances of the same event playing twice in this film is that of Sati warning the lecherous grocer to mind his behavior in her presence. And yet the same scene comes to be located in different narrative trajectories across its two presentations. The first time, it is part of Tanna's story, and the second time, a part of Sati's story, thus forming a circular and closed trajectory of its own. The film plays another episode belonging to Sati's narrative two times. The second iteration concerns the disappearance of Sati from the scene. This is present to us for the first time in a scene in which a man tells a crowd gathering outside a house that he had seen a horse cart driven by a corpse in it, shrouded in white, which was in all probability Sati's, and that she had been murdered by Mahesar and Chaman. This is narrated within the larger story of Tanna and his wife. This very scene is nearly replayed at the end of Manik's narration of Sati's story. Despite using the technique of replay more than once in the film, Benegal makes each repetition unique and different from other replays. In this case, the first announcement of Sati's probable death shows a man standing outside the locked door of a dwelling with a crowd gathered before it. In the second and last replay, the perspective of the scene is slightly altered. The man and his crowd of listeners are at a greater distance from the lens of the camera this time, so that viewers' field of vision is able to take in the figure of Manik Mullah walking past Sati's house in front of which the crowd is gathered. Manik is missing from the spectator's field of vision in the earlier presentation of the same scene. But why the shifted perspective? Manik has, in the previous instances in the film, played the role of a witness, as in the case of Jamuna meeting Tanna. But this time, he is as much an active player as a witness of the incident as he is narrating. Since in all likelihood, it was his betrayal of Sati that led her disappearance. Thus, the change made by Nigel in playing out this scene the second time makes it more meaningful for the viewer's comprehension in a way that earlier presentation could not manage. Also, there is another repeated scene of the wedding vows of Tanna and Lily. The fairas, where the couple walks around the fire as sacred witnesses, are shown twice in the film. First, cursorily while recounting the story of Tanna and his wedding. Second, within the story of Lily, so that now we know that Tanna's wife reimagines herself in love with Manik Mullah and that she takes the vows with broken heart. The above instance, as well as those concerning Sati and Jamuna's visit to her parental home, use the technique of the replayed scene in such a way that the viewer watching the same scene again has, in the interval between the two depictions of it, acquired greater knowledge of the context surrounding it. So they are able to make a considered judgment on it. And then there are the references. Aside from overt discussions of technique and references to other authors like Tagore, Premchand, Chekhov and Maupassant, the motif of Devdas in the film also adds to its self-reflexive character. Devdas is the film that Lily and her friends Kammo go to watch. As Lily informs Manik Mullah, saying pityingly that Kammo could not understand its profundity. Lily, as Jamna before her, effortlessly quotes lines from Devdas with great empathy and emotion, vicariously experiencing the emotions of the characters of Devdas. Benegal uses it more extensively in his film for parody, showing how the influence of Devdas in the lives of its viewers make them incapable of discrimination, but drawing them into sentimentality and rendering them incapable of distinguishing fiction from real life. Hence, Jamuna quotes from Devdas to explain to Manik Mullah the reason why Tanna will not disobey his father. Again, Jamuna reads from Devdas, loudly enough for Tanna to hear relevant excerpts about parental withholding of consent to the young lover's marriage. The ability to interpret the mundane happenings of one's life from the perspective of a hugely sentimental novel is mocked by the film as a pitiable need of a middle class girl to see her life as larger than life and tragic in a grand manner. Benegal brings Devdas into the picture to make a point about commercial Indian cinema, which has seen 15 cinematic versions of the book. The novel and the film adaptation of Suraj Ka Satwa Ghoda conclude differently. The novel ends with a sense of closure after Monik philosophizes about the seventh horse of the sun, which he credits for inspiring the novel's unique title. Meanwhile, the film has an open ending, with Manik speaking to his audience outside his house about the seventh horse that leads us forward. As he speaks, Sati emerges from the darkness and shockingly reveals that she is the seventh horse of the Manik's failure as well as his downfall. Manik follows her in a daze, and the film cuts to the scene of a galloping horse before returning to the narrator standing before the painting of the first scene. The narrator that reveals that Manik Babu disappeared after this event. The open ending allows for multiple interpretations.